Morning, everybody. At least it is morning in the UK, as I always say. I keep saying this to you, just to remind you that we all live in different parts of the world, and through this little medium, we can talk to a lot of people in a lot of different places. I haven't posted anything for a week or two. It's about 10 days now. And in that 10 days, we've seen utter madness descend on the United Kingdom. Some media idiots decided they were going to put around a false story that there was a shortage of fuel, petrol, we call it, gas in America. So what's happened? The public have stampeded out in their millions, filled up their cars, and guess what? There is now a petrol shortage caused by people creating a ridiculous demand, an unexpected demand, which of course the supply chain can't cope with. As we know, the supply chain in retailing is just long enough. In other words, you only have in stock what you need. I'm a businessman. I run lots of different businesses. And one thing you don't want is lots of stock lying about that nobody's bought. Because otherwise, all your profit ends up on the shelves, gathering dust. And sooner or later, if you carry on doing that, you will not be in business. Because there isn't sufficient profit nowadays. The margins aren't enough to be able to keep stuff on your shelves for months and months on end. So the supply chain now is literally week to week, day to day. And the same applies to petrol or fuel, gas, call it what you want. There is only enough in the filling stations, gas stations, for a few days until the next tanker arrives. They're not in the business of storing large amounts of petrol, gas, on site, because if you do that, you've got literally in Britain we've got thousands and thousands of pounds worth of fuel sat in tanks, and that's not what they want. So what's happened? We've got a few media types who decide to put out a story that there's a shortage of truck drivers, and the reason they've put it out is because they've been against the Brexit, which is Britain leaving the European Union. Now, prior to Brexit, and a few months ago, there were lots of Eastern Europeans over here working. And of course, the corporations like these people because they work for less money. That's what the corporations always like, don't they? So a lot of these European lorry drivers were over here working. They've all now gone back. And that's created, apparently, they're telling people that this is the reason. I'll be getting to the real reason a bit later. But this has created, allegedly, a shortage of truck drivers, what we in the United Kingdom call lorry drivers. Okay? It's not actually true. One of the reasons there's a shortage of lorry drivers, truck drivers, is because many of the drivers have left the industry because the paying conditions are awful. Guys now who are dealing with, or driving big rigs particularly, will spend 4 or 5 days away from home, living out of the cab. We all got sleeper cabs on these things now. Working, they get paid for about 60 hours a week. But in actual fact, they're working 24 hours a day because when you've got a rig, you can't just clear off and leave it. You've got to stay with it. So essentially, you're still working. You're never off the clock. Now, these guys are away for, like I say, 4 or 5 days. They get paid about, they were previously, Class 1 drivers were getting 30,000, 36,000 a year. But when you consider how many hours they're working, this doesn't relate to a lot of money. In fact, I've heard truck drivers say that they can make more money working in a supermarket stacking shelves if you work the same number of hours. So if you're working 15 hours a day stacking shelves, actually you wouldn't be able to do that because guess what? You know, if you stack shelves, you're not allowed to work 15 hours a day. But if you drive a big truck, you are. That's bizarre, isn't it? Does that make any sense? Somebody who's in charge of a huge lorry truck can be driving it for umpteen hours a day, essentially in charge of it for 24 hours a day. And yet somebody who stacks supermarket shelves, you're not allowed to because there are laws about that. Interesting, isn't it? How weird. So a lot of drivers have left the industry and gone and done easier jobs where they've actually got a home life. You know, we live in a world now where, you know, if you're married or in a relationship and you're away from home 4 days a week, 5 days a week, the little lady isn't going to be very pleased about it. Oh, she'll like the money that you're getting, but most of us know that it won't be long before she's toddling off with somebody else who's got a more sociable job. You know, somebody who's at home every night, for instance. Somebody who's not spending 5 nights a week living in his truck. So lots of guys, apparently, somebody was telling me the other day, now I don't know if this is true because I've not checked this, but he told me it was, and he's a truck driver himself. And he told me that there's 1 million people. I say people because the vast, vast majority of them are men. Okay? There are female truck drivers, we know that, but they're a very, very small minority. The majority of people who drive trucks are men. But he was telling me that there's 1 million people in the United Kingdom who've got a heavy goods license. For those who don't know, in the United Kingdom, you have different types of licenses, which permit you to drive bigger and bigger trucks. And there are also specialist ones like tanker drivers where you have to have extra qualifications because of the load that you're carrying, so I understand. But there are 1 million people. Now, there aren't 1 million truck drivers currently working, so presumably there's a lot of people who've got heavy goods licenses who are not in the industry anymore. Why's that? Well, one of the reasons is because the conditions are appalling, as I just alluded to. Long nights away, nights and nights away, you know, not that much money when you consider how many hours you're working. They also don't get paid for breaks and stuff like that. You know, they have enforced breaks where they have to take a break. They only get paid for the time they're actually driving the truck. You know, but it's like, it's a bit like having a job where you're just on call all the time. You're never off the clock, apart from perhaps at the weekend. And this is how they work, these guys. And a lot of guys have just decided now, you know, they're probably getting plenty of that from the wife. Oh, you're always away from home. Now they are. And they probably get another job doing something else, where they can make as much money, but from far less arduous work, and certainly a job where you get a social life and a family life. You know, that's what they do. So we've had a bit of a situation whereby some of the drivers, as I understand it, what I've been told by truck drivers, these are industry insiders, so they're not press. So ignore what you're reading in the press, because it ain't true, most of it. People who are in the industry are telling me that one of the reasons was that a lot of these Eastern European drivers working for agencies before, because that's where you can make money and stuff like that. No problem with that. They were allowed to do this, and you can understand why they came over here, because they're going to earn a lot more money here than where they were from, whatever country they were from. And then they would make stop a year or two, make a load of money and go back. That's what people do. People have been doing that for decades, nothing to do with the EU. People do it all the time. I mean, I remember a lot of English people working in the Middle East because there's huge amounts of money. You know, whatever you were being paid here, you could get 3, 4, 5 times out there. So they're not getting anybody for doing that. That's what way the system works. But apparently these guys are working for the agencies, and the agencies basically supply, if you like, emergency labour when corporations need it. And they tended to pay a little bit more money because the nature of the work was sporadic. You'd got no permanent job, in other words. You got a few days here, a few days there. But the money was slightly better. Now what's happened, these drivers have gone back to their own countries because of new regulations. And these agencies have been left very short-handed. So what they've done is they've upped their rates, what they're paying the drivers. So a lot of drivers are leaving jobs where they've worked for, say, a petrol company or a supermarket where they've been working for years in a relatively secure job. I say relatively, but not that much money. But the temptation to go to these agencies is now overwhelming because the difference in pay is enormous. This guy told me that drivers who he knows who were working 4 or 5 days a week have gone to work for agencies, picking up a load here, a load there. And now they can work 2 or 3 days a week and still earn the same money. Now, what's happening is that some of the traditional employers who have had them on full time have exploited the fact. that these agencies, these foreign drivers have been here to keep down wages. So a lot of these guys have not had a proper pay rise. So they've got poorer and poorer and poorer relative to inflation. The conditions are poor. Like I said, long nights away from home, week after week after week. You're virtually living out your lorry, living out your truck. So these guys are thinking, oh, this is all right. I can move from my job now where I am, go to an agency, just work a couple of hours here, a couple of days here, a couple of days there. I'm at home most of the time, only the odd night or two per week. And the other thing is I can turn this work down anytime I want. I log on in the morning, see what's available. If I fancy it, I do it. If not, I don't. Flexible all of a sudden. And they know there's always going to be plenty of work there. So this is what's been happening. So this has left people like oil companies a little bit short of labour. Two factors combined. This sudden thing about the agencies recruiting people, and the gradual loss of people with heavy goods vehicle licenses from the industry because of poor terms and conditions. Which brings me to an interesting point, and this is where I'll get a little bit angry. Have you ever noticed that whenever you see these top executives and how much money they're getting, they always justify it by saying, well, we have to pay this money to get the right people because, there's a shortage of top managers. We have to pay £500,000, £1 million a year plus bonuses to get the right person for the job. But it's funny, isn't it, how that principle doesn't work lower down in the job market. So they've confessed themselves that they've got a shortage of lorry drivers, truck drivers, and yet the wages haven't gone up and the conditions haven't improved. Funny that, isn't it? Appears that that's a philosophy of paying the big bucks to the top dogs doesn't work its way down to the ordinary rank and file, like you and me. Interesting fact. Of course, another thing that's happened is that we've seen the power of the media and the impotence of the government. All right? Power of the media is they make a story up, exaggerate it like crazy, and then the public watch these things on the internet or on the TV news and just become hysterical. I mean, I've witnessed sites myself this week that I was laughing. I'm lucky. One time a day I used to use the vehicle for my business, so I'd be quite worried now. I don't anymore, I work from home. And my vehicle, I use it when I want to use it. Don't particularly need to use it. I'm near enough to everything that I can walk if I want. Yeah, some of us do actually walk still, even if it's only 50 yards. It's quite novel. Keep fit that way as well. So if I need anything, I don't particularly have to use my car. So what I've done is I've left my car in the garage and I've let other people have the petrol that they need for work and stuff like that, which is the fair thing to do. There are people who do need that. People like plumbers, electricians, drivers, taxi drivers. They need it for their lifeline, for their businesses. And so I've just decided to walk and use public transport because I don't need to do it. Oh dear, I'm in a minority though, aren't I? There's people hysterically running out and filling their tanks up and anything else they've got to hand, including that woman yesterday who was all over the social media, who was emptying water out of water bottles and actually filling them up with petrol. Of course, somebody needs to pull her aside and say, by the way, that's highly dangerous, it's illegal, and guess what? You've contaminated that petrol with water because you've just poured water out of that thing, that container. So there will still be water in there. And guess what happens when water and petrol mix and you put them in your car? That's right, your car stops and it breaks down. Because guess what? Petrol engines don't particularly like having their fuel contaminated with water. So I think somebody needs to get people like that to one side and just explain to them, just calm down, dear. Just calm down. Stop being hysterical and just think for yourself for a minute. I saw one guy yesterday. I actually witnessed this with my own eyes. And he was filling his car up. There was a queue, of course. It's died down a little bit over the weekend. After the weekend, the weekend, they were queuing out the garages, out the filling stations. Now there's a few people on and they're running out very quickly, the garages, because as soon as it comes in, people are filling up and it's disappearing. Well, yesterday I witnessed this myself, just a garage not far from me. There's a guy there, an old guy who should know better. He's obviously been driving for a long time. And he's trying to get the, have you seen that thing where people are trying to fill up and get their, fill it absolutely to the brim, and they keep taking the nozzle out of the thing. Well, he kept doing that, and eventually about a gallon of fuel blew back at him. Right? All over the forecourt. I don't know if he caught for some as well. He might have done. Next thing, he's waving hysterically to the forecourt attendant who's in his little office. What he's waving for, I don't know. He's waving hysterically at the guy in the little booth. Next thing, this guy goes up to the door to the shop, and he's shouting something and going hysterical at this guy. I mean, what's wrong with him? What's he expecting this little fella to do? Sat in his little booth. Of course, if he'd have engaged his brain, I actually thought about going over myself and taking command of the situation. Right? Because what do you do in that situation if you spill petrol on a garage forecourt? Any answers? Well, the one thing you do is calm down. The next thing you do is, if you go onto garage forecourts, there's always those buckets, isn't there, with fire written on them. And they're full of sand. And the reason they're full of sand is so that if there's a spillage of petrol, you can scatter the sand and it will soak it up. You can then sweep it away and dispose of it. Right? Now, waving your arms around and shouting hysterically is not what you should do. Well, you shouldn't do it in the first place. That's the thing. Don't fill your petrol up your tank up so far that it blows back at you and goes all over things. I mean, that's why they have these cut-offs. But this numpty had obviously not realised that modern cars now, they have a little flap just part way down the tube, the filler tube, so that when you put the nozzle in, fully in, it opens that flap. But of course, if you keep withdrawing the nozzle, eventually that flap will close, and the next time you press the trigger, guess what happens? That's right, it all squirts back at you. Now, this bloke was an older bloke. He was probably older than me, so he must have been driving a long time, and he's never worked this one out. I can understand if it were a young kid, didn't realise. But this is an old guy, and he's made this stupid mistake to start with. And then he's compounded by running around like a headless chicken. But this is the frame of mind that people are in now. Over the last couple of years, people have been systematically worked on to create panic, so that they will do what governments and the other people in the establishment are telling them to do. And we know that there are psychologists working on these government panels, and they're telling people, advising the government how to do this, how to get people whipped into a frenzy, and then you can control them. And the media's been at it as well, doing the same thing for the last couple of years. In fact, they were doing it before that, because we've had loads of these alleged crises that are completely made up by the media to get ratings and to get hits on their websites and all the rest of it. And the public now apparently have lost all judgment. They've lost all common sense. They've lost the ability to reason for themselves. And I'm beginning to get that feeling, because I don't watch the mainstream media at all. I spend most of my time watching different things that I'm particularly interested in online, on my TV. I don't watch the mainstream media, and I certainly do not watch the news. I haven't watched the news for donkey's years, because I know that the news is anything but news. It's propaganda, meaning that it's there to shape the public opinion, the public's opinion about things, and to confuse people and stop them from seeing what the true picture of the world is. That's what it's for. And because of this, I'm not subjected to this. I'm still little old me, how I was 20, 30, 40 years ago, before all this madness started. So I'm like one of those characters. Have you ever seen those zombie films where there's some guy who's in hospital or something and he's got bandages on his eyes, so he's not affected by it, Day of the Triffids type thing. And then he goes out the next day and he looks, and everybody's turned into a zombie. And he can see him, but other people can't. You know, that kind of feeling where you just don't fit in anymore. Well, I've had that feeling for some time now. The great swathes of humanity, I cannot relate to them at all. I can't even talk to them because they're in this world where all they're doing is they parrot things like a little parrot. That they've seen it on the media, and like a parrot, they sit there absorbing this and then regurgitating it again. I was watching some. We've all seen them. I was watching a couple yesterday, popped up on my YouTube. You know, the talking parrot that can mimic a Samsung phone. Really funny. I mean, it's just funny. I mean, it's funny that this thing sits there and it listens to these noises and it mimics the noises, because that's what they do. And when we bring them into our human world, they start mimicking us. And it's quite funny when we get a replay of ourselves coming back at us. It's quite funny, isn't it? The old parrot's no idea what you're saying. He just does it. He just mimics whatever you're saying. And it is hilariously funny. But I get the impression a lot of people are actually like that now. They see it on the news. Oh, they have to go out and tell everybody, don't they? Oh, have you heard about that? Oh, there's this happening. And now they're the expert, aren't they? They've seen a 5-minute piece on the news. And now they're the expert on whatever crisis it is. And they sit there in the pub or in the office or talking to people in the street. And they're the expert on it. They know all about it. They don't tell you that I saw it on the news, actually. I don't know if it's true, but I saw it on the news. And they were saying blah, blah, blah. They don't say that. They stand there as if they've done all the research themselves. Oh, yes, what's happening is that blah, 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 yes, blah, 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 blah. And I'm an expert. And they don't know absolutely jack about what they're talking about, because all they've done is parrot whatever they've read on the internet or what they've seen on the evening news. And I feel like this now. One time of the day, I used to try and put people right, but they get very upset if you start doing that. So I just let them, oh, is that right? Really? Okay, yeah. Bye. That's my reaction. I don't even bother talking to them now. People tell you these things and they're an expert on it, you know. Of course, another thing that appeals to me is, see, chaps like me, people like me, are used to all of this, the media, camouflage and everything, and, you know, telling people lies and stuff like that. Because, you know, I'm one of those conspiracy theorists, you know, that believe in UFOs and stuff like that. You know, that thing that we've been told for years and years and years is a conspiracy theorist and you're all nuts. Well, funny thing is, the American government have now admitted it. It's actually true. So it appears that us conspiracy theorists were actually telling the truth all along and being ridiculed and, you know, called lunatics and laughed at. Remember those not adverts, those pieces you used to get on the evening news, the "and finally" pieces. And finally, this person says he's seen a UFO. And the little green men, isn't there? You always had to have that thing, little green men. You always had to have that. Despite the fact that nobody ever reported any little green men. They might have reported little grey men, but not green men. I've never heard a report of that. But that's the way it's been dealt with. So for us, we're well used to all this, and we're looking for behind. Whenever you hear these things, you always try and look behind what's behind this. Now, one of the things we know is, and I've been talking to yourselves, other people about this, that, you know, artificial intelligence, robotics are going to completely change our way of life. Certainly the job market. There's a small matter of people are talking about 30-40% unemployment, because these machines are going to be doing work that was previously or now at present done by people from all sorts of professions. Don't just think that these machines are going to be doing the mundane tasks in some warehouse somewhere or in some factory. No. Right across the board, old boy. And one of the things that's going to disappear, one of the jobs or types of job that are going to disappear are driving jobs. I can quite confidently say that in 10 years' time, there'll be very, very few truck drivers, very, very few train drivers, very, very few pilots of airliners. Now, why am I saying this? Well, one, that technology already exists, and there are two aspects of technology, implementing technology. Number one, getting the technology to actually work in a physical sense. Does this technology actually work, and is it safe enough to use? We're already at that stage. Went past that about probably a couple of years ago. And the second one is getting the public to use it and accept it. You know, we've had aircraft, for instance, that can land themselves for years and years and years. It's arguable that a pilot isn't really necessary anymore. What tends to happen now when you go on your little trip to wherever you're going on your holiday, in the days when you could go on your trip on your holiday, the plane took off and landed and flew there, largely on automatic. Any pilot will tell you this. A lot of the time they're just sat there looking at the dials while the machine does it all. And they take over for takeoff and landing, but that's only because they're told to do that. In actual fact, the plane is capable of landing itself and taking off itself. It's just a computer program that it follows, the same as it does when it's on autopilot. It's just that the public wouldn't fancy that. They want, if you have to do all the surveys, they want a grey-haired, middle-aged man with a nice accent to fly the plane, thanks ever so much. We want, that's what we want. That's how we feel comfortable when we're flying to Spain or wherever it is. So the airline companies still have pilots there. And the reason they do that is because if they've advertised, oh, use such and such an air. Say I've set up an airline and I told the public that I didn't have pilots. We don't need them. I mean, I don't think you could do that because I don't think the authorities would let you yet. But let's just say we did. People wouldn't fancy flying on an airplane with no pilot, controlled by machine. What? So people wouldn't book. They'd go to another airline that still uses pilots. That's the reason they don't do it. But technically, they could do it. These planes are well capable of flying themselves. Ditto for trains. And you might say, well, trains, what? You have to have a driver for a train. Well, you don't actually. Docklands Light Railway in London doesn't have drivers. Or it didn't at one time. I don't know if it does now. But it was certainly capable of driving itself. And there are a number of other ones around the world that are similar. Drive automatically. But the problem is, you see, that the public, although you've got the technical ability to do it, the public wouldn't wear it. Well, what if you get a situation where you've got a shortage of truck drivers and then somebody comes along with the solution? Well, don't worry, folks. We've got these driverless vehicles that we can bring out and use. Perhaps the hysterical public might be a little more inclined to go along with that. Makes you think, doesn't it? Of course, these things are always a long-term plan. If the powers that be wanted to introduce these vehicles in 5 years' time, they would start prepping the public now. Because the public don't like things happening all of a sudden. But they will accept things that are gradual. So in other words, if we saw a increasing number of problems allegedly caused by the absence or not enough truck drivers, which is actually wrong, it's incorrect, and then a solution was offered that included driverless vehicles, perhaps the public would be more inclined to go along with it. Who knows? Who knows? So that's where I think I'm beginning to wonder if that's part of the agenda. I don't know that it is, but I'm beginning to wonder if it is. But in any event, the petrol crisis that we've got that's being screamed at from every news headline at the moment will flatten out anyway, because after a while everybody's got full tanks and they're only doing the same amount of usage as they did before. There isn't a shortage of petrol. There's a shortage of garages that have got petrol because all the idiots have been out and bought it all, panic buying. Now, some people have got justifiable reasons for doing that, like I said before. They run vehicles that they need for business or for their employment. But I'm quite sure that a lot of people don't need them. They've just gone out and stampeded with the rest of the herd and spurred on by the media into a panic. But after a few days, this will level off and we're back to some semblance of normality again, because they're still getting deliveries. So the demand will drop because you can only get so much petrol in a car or any vehicle. After that, you can't get any more. So that's the way. It'll be just a few days where things are in short supply, disrupted, and then we'll get back to normal. And then everybody will see how stupid it is. Funny thing is, everybody's on Facebook telling everybody else not to panic buy, but I bet they're doing it. That's another thing, isn't it? It's right life, that is. Yeah, telling everybody else not to panic buy, but I bet you any money them people who are telling people that have been out and done it, they can't resist it. Oh, by the way, I'm going to mention that from a psychological point of view. You know, advertisers, when they advertise products on television and stuff, one of the things that a lot of people don't realise is that if you ask people, what does an advert do? Most people will say, well, it tells you how good the product is, and probably by extension, how much your life will improve if you have this product. And that's what most people think that advertising does. But what if I told you that any psychologist will tell you that the pleasure you get from having something is massively outweighed by the fear of not having it? In other words, using negative advertising. It's what they call FOMO. Fear, it's an acronym. Fear of missing out. In other words, you convince people that something terrible is going to happen. They're going to miss out if they don't buy this project. And guess what? That's far more powerful in the human brain than telling people how wonderful it is that if they've got this product. It comes back, psychologists will tell you, it comes back to the fear of shortages, fear of famine. For a long time in human existence, there were times when there wasn't enough food to go around. So people have got this hoarding instinct for a start. That's where that comes from. They've also got this fear of missing out, trying to get as much as they can while the going's good. And that's why it's a lot more a stronger driving force than actually having the product itself. And that's why when you see a lot of products, there's always got a special offer, isn't there? And it always ends in a couple of days. That's creating a psychological thing in your brain that you're going to miss out on it. And they're telling you to go and buy tomorrow. They're trying to get into a panic, in other words. And if you look at advertising tonight, for instance, when you go back home and you're looking at the television tonight, just have a look how many products are advertised on the basis of fear of missing out. Sometimes it's quite subtle. You know, typically it's offer ends at such and such a date. You know, we're only open this time, or, you know, while stocks last. All these kind of expressions are all about fear of missing out, rather than extolling the virtue of the product. I mean, you see this, for instance, on during my lifetime, car adverts, for instance, have massively changed. Partly because in the old days, cars were always advertised towards men. And what men are interested in is the specification of the engine, how many brake horsepower it is, what kind of brakes the car's got, what kind of optional extras it's got, that kind of thing. In other words, practical aspects, benefits of the product itself. Now, of course, it's rather different. The adverts are spread across the demographic far more than what they were. So now we see very smug people driving around on empty roads, enjoying themselves with their best friend. And usually it shows that the person who's driving is in control of everything and they are the top dog in the relationship, whatever it is. And that is what they're doing. They're selling this now as part of a lifestyle and a part of the ego drive of the person who's the prospective buyer. So all of a sudden now they're not talking about the car at all. They don't tell you what kind of engine it's got, how efficient it is, what brake horsepower it is, what kind of brakes it's got. Don't tell you that no more. There's not, all you see is the car driving about. But it's what they're doing is they put it as part of your lifestyle. This is how it could be. And then, of course, that's part of the fear of missing out. If you don't buy the product, your life will be one of these losers. And they usually show you a loser who hasn't bought the product and what an idiot they are. Just have a look. Don't take my word for it. Go on tonight. If you can, wipe away the brainwashing that you've had and wash it with new eyes, clearer eyes, based on what I've just told you. And all of a sudden you'll see what it's all about, how they're playing with your head, because that's what they're doing. They employ psychologists, these advertising companies, how to run an advertising campaign. And I can tell you that fear of missing out is far more powerful than the desire to have something that's nice to have, nice to own. A lot more. So that's why the advertising tends to be negative. It makes fun of people who haven't got the product, it makes them look like buffoons. And it makes the person who has got the product, in this example a car, to look very smug, very powerful, very in control, and everybody's going to admire you. And they're showing you that yin and yang. The loser who hasn't got the product and the successful person, the person who's going to be admired by everybody who's driving that car. They don't tell you about the car, do they? You watch the advert, you're still none the wiser what the technical spec is for that car. There might be a little bit of writing at the bottom. Usually that tells you that that's the top of the range one. So you know that they said prices start at such and such a price. That's not the car that you're seeing. That's a car with virtually nothing. You know, it's the basic model. The model that they're showing you actually in the thing is the top of the range model. That's probably about double the price. So that's the way it works. They're playing with your heads. And that's where we are now. So, hopefully, if there's anybody out there who's still got control of their own mind, which after all this time now, I'm beginning to wonder if there are that many people left. Probably only people like me who don't watch the media, the mainstream media anyway. If you've still got control of your own rational way of thinking, just have a look at what's happening. People are now being controlled by fear, and governments and the establishment have become addicted to it. They rather like the idea of being in control, and they rather like they've got the keys to your brain. Now, we've had it in the last couple of years. They've been using these psychologists and everything to shape people's opinions. And now they don't want to let go. They've now got used to this. And the kind of people who want to be in government, want to be leaders, leaders, that's a laugh, are people who crave power. And now they've got a new technique. Well, it's not a new technique, to be honest. It's a bit Machiavellian, isn't it? I mean, it's all Machiavellian, this stuff. Get the people into a panic and then offer them that you're the only solution to whatever it is. And because they're in a panic, they'll accept anything. Every dictator in history has used that technique. But we've got people now who have got rather attached to this power that they've got, and they're not going to let go. They are not going to let go. And if you think they are, you are mistaken. If you look at history, once people get power, they're not going to let go of it. It becomes addictive. And it's the way that they go is once they get a little bit of power, they want more and more and more, which means that we've got less and less control over our lives. So if you want to go along in that, if you're happy doing that, giving over your life to be dictated to by somebody in your government or whoever it is, some corporation somewhere dictating policy, using checkbook politics, well, fine, if you're all right with that, but you'll end up a slave. Oh, yes, you will, because that's the way it goes. If they're putting more and more power over you and you're losing more and more of your freedom, eventually you end up a slave, and it's not that long. And once you're a slave, you'll never get out of it. Once you're a slave, you can't turn around and say, actually, I've had second thoughts about this now. Can we go back to how we were before? Not going to happen, is it? You need to check it now and say, we're not having this. I'm not going to be played. I'm not going to be manipulated like this. And the first thing to do is switch off your mainstream television. Start finding out things for yourself. Stop listening to them idiots. Second thing, is to start thinking for yourself. Start thinking about other people for a change. You know when you're queuing up in that gas station, who's behind you? Is it your local doctor who's trying to do his rounds? Is it your local nurse who's trying to get to see old people and look after them? Is it somebody's carer who needs petrol to get to the old people? You know them people that you're sat in front of, and you're going to fill your car up and then leave it sat in the garage, just in case you might need it. Have a think. Have a think. Are you pushing in front of a guy who's trying to earn a living, like a plumber or electrician? Somebody who's got people with problems waiting for him to come with his van and sort it out. Who are you in front of when you're in that petrol queue? Because you're selfish. You've already got half a tank, but you want to fill up. Oh, it's been on television that they're running out. Grow up. Grow up. Act like an adult. Stop acting like an hysterical auntie. Right? Start thinking for yourself. Turn off your television. Think for yourself. Stop being stampeded into this mindset of hysteria. Like I said, my car's in the garage. It's going to stop there. I'm lucky I don't particularly need it. I can walk to places. Instead of going to a shop down the road where normally I drive, I'm walking to my local shop and I'll carry the stuff back home. I don't need my car. I'll leave the petrol that's there for people like doctors, nurses, carers, taxi drivers who need it for their jobs. Other people I mentioned like plumbers, electricians, people like this, gas fitters, people who central heating people. These kind of guys, it's essential that they get around to keep everything going. I'm not essential, me. I work from home. I do anyway. I'm not an essential person anymore. Maybe I used to be when I used to do a job like that, where I was trucking around all day, installing and fixing telephone systems and telecommunications equipment. That's what I used to do. I used to travel all over the country, but I don't do that now. I just basically buy and sell stuff on the internet. Right? So I don't need my car. So I'm leaving my car in the garage and I'll walk places or go on public transport so that other people who need it can get theirs. And then in a couple of weeks, or it'll be a couple of days, I think by the end of this week, this crisis will have gone, because everybody will have a full tank of petrol. And how much you can use. You're not going to use it the same amount. And there's no problem with supply. The only problem is that people have been panic buying. That's the problem. Or hopefully the media will have got bored of this story and they'll have gone on to something else. That's what they usually do. It's probably a slow news week this week. This is why they've created this thing. But there you go. Hopefully, next time I see you, the garages will be open and we'll be back to normal. But by then we'll probably have another crisis, another self-inflicted wound, courtesy of the media. I wonder if it's about time that these people were brought to book. When they create these fake stories and there are repercussions, maybe some people ought to get fired or fined. Their newspapers or TV stations should be massively fined for inciting. Essentially it's economic terrorism. And I don't use that expression lightly. That's what it is. They're deliberately creating a problem, disrupting society. How long are we going to tolerate this for? They're doing it by fabricating stories or exaggerating situations beyond any semblance of what is true. It's fake news. So how long as a society are we going to put up with this? It's a thought. So I'll leave you with that one. And I hope everything improves in the next few days. But in the meantime, my car's staying in the garage. See you later. Look after yourselves. Love you all. Bye.